I've just realised that the judge is no longer looking at me. This is a tragedy. Come on, judge. There he is. I wanted him to be looking at me because I started to read Blood Meridian this month and I tried to get through it. This is the second time I've tried to read it and I failed again. I failed him. So he's just going to loom over me for the remainder of this video as a reminder of my failure in life. But I promise I will read Blood Meridian. This is just to hold myself accountable for it. Hi, welcome to Work in Progress. This is my channel dedicated to my continual development in reading and in writing. Today I'm going to be going through what I read in August, and my girlfriend will be joining us later to talk about what she's picked for my September TBR, which I've also done on her channel. So yeah, let's get started. So the first book I read this month was Rebecca F. Kuang's Yellowface. Now, this is a satirical book tackling the publishing industry, racism, white privilege, very contentious topics, and it tackles June Haywood, an aspiring writer who has a best friend, Aurora. She's a very successful writer, and she has been from a very young age. She is around when Aurora suddenly dies in this tragic accident, a rather ridiculous accident in which she chokes to death on a pancake. While she's around Aurora's house where they're having these pancakes, June finds a manuscript. It's Aurora's last completed work before her death, and no one else knows about it because Aurora does a thing of never telling anyone what she's working on. She never tells anyone what it's about. So June decides to take this work for herself, and the book basically talks about how June is adopting the identity of a writer with a different ethnicity and the ethics and the moral implications of such a thing. Going into it, I thought this could be brilliant. It meets a lot of my expectations. It was really a good read, and I think R.F. Kuang has a great command over her prose. I think it's a really engaging read. You just have to go through it once you've started. What's great about satire is the moment it starts, you're always waiting for it to just keep getting more and more absurd, and it's the trajectory of that makes it so enjoyable. I don't love where it goes in the third act. It's been very grounded up until the third act, but then it just goes a bit too far with it. Up until then, a really great read. The second book I read in August was Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I seem to remember reading this when I was younger. I think I was way too young to read it though. I think I read it when I was about 12. But The Road tells the story of a father and son surviving in the post-apocalypse and their seeming journey towards something. They're journeying towards the coast. They're just trying to survive, and it tackles their survival in a very grounded, very realistic way. Whilst they're going through this landscape, this dystopian, apocalyptic landscape, they're set upon by cannibals, the weather, the adverse environment. It's a book about perseverance, and through all this, there is an unbelievable amount of love and tenderness. The relationship between the father and son is really beautifully explored here. And McCarthy's prose is just, it's extraordinary the way he writes this. And I can't recommend this book highly enough, although I think a lot of people have already read it. The next book I read, I sort of got on a Cormac McCarthy kick, which I'm still on. But the next book I read was Child of God, which was one of his earlier works. This tells the story of a man named Lester Ballard, who is a man with some very untoward desires, let's put it mildly. He's a very perverse man, and it talks about his sort of interactions with his environment, with other people, and the things he does when there's no one around. The way that McCarthy writes this, it's not so much a condemnation as it is watching and observing this man do the things he does, these horrible, horrible things. And where the story goes, the way it unfolds, it's incredibly well written, as you would expect with McCarthy's work. It's incredibly uncomfortable, and there's a scene in this where I'm just like, ugh. It just sort of brings it to the surface, this discomfort that McCarthy does so well. And it's the fact that he doesn't linger. He chooses not to linger on certain moments that just makes them so uncomfortable. I think I read this within 24 hours. It's such a good book. But yeah, every experience with McCarthy's work that I've had has been a good one. And this has a great ending as well. Really good ending. Next, I read The Catcher in the Rye. We don't get taught this in English schools. I think it's such an American text, and I think it would be perfectly reasonable to teach them it because it is really well written. It talks about a young man named Holden Caulfield who has just been expelled from school, and he decides, I'm not going to tell my parents about this. His mother's been through some loss, so he decides that he's going to go on some kind of adventure and just explore the world and get to know life as it is out there. His encounters with people and the way that he sees the world, he's incredibly accurate as a teenager. This is the most teenager to have ever teenagered. He's whiny, he's annoying, and he's very emo as well. Anyone who's been a teenager can relate to and empathize with his position as a young man, because the way that Salinger writes this, the whole way through, there's this incredible sense of melancholy, and it almost builds like dread. It just keeps building, and you just start to feel sadder and sadder. And I don't quite know how he's done it, even if he's annoying, even if he's occasionally insufferable. He's so well written and so developed. Even if this book is the red flag for blokes, read it. Just give it a read. I think you can read it very quickly and you will see a lot of yourself in there. You might not see everything. We don't need every man in the world to be Holden Caulfield, but it's good to recognise yourself in this character and to be able to empathise with his position, even if we're not all like him. So up next was The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks, who I only recently found out passed away very young. I was recommended this by my tutor at uni. It always stuck in my head that he recommended it to me. He's a talented writer, there's no denying that. The prose is very good and very evocative. His characters, to me, it's just I wasn't able to empathise with them. I couldn't put myself in their shoes at all. It was a very sort of cold, clinical read where I couldn't just make the leap into their world. I don't know what it was, but just not for me. I think that there are some great scenes in this, and I think that his writing really does evoke a sense of fear and horror, especially in some of the flashback sequences, which are really good. But otherwise, no, it's just not for me, this one. I think if you enjoy sort of occult, provocative horror, you might like this. Not for me. Next, me and my girlfriend went to Waterstones in Piccadilly, which is this enormous, grandiose bookshop. And it has so many floors of books, and it was an absolute treat to go there, to be honest. While we were there, I picked up this book, Evie Wyld's The Echoes. It reminded me a lot of A Ghost Story by David Lowery, the film, just because the premise itself speaks of how one of the characters in this book is a ghost who's occupying the apartment in which they lived in before they died. And I just love that. I thought that was such a wonderful concept. But if it was mostly focusing on the ghost and the relationship between the living at the time, I think this book would have been more for me. Whereas the book goes into the past a lot and talks about the story involved with the ghost's girlfriend. That wasn't where my interest was. In itself, it's an interesting story. It talks about racism, prejudice, and how actions from the past repeat themselves in the future. To see it unfold in the way that it does, it's got a very non-linear narrative, and it flips between characters and between voices. And it's a really interesting execution, and it's, I will admit, quite well done. However, chapters themselves almost come across as clunky because you're going straight from one character's perspective into another, you're going from the past to the future. There's no indication as to the time period. You've literally got to go off what's in the text, which I do respect in a sense. I think it really does make a reader active. However, I think that it could have been clearer, just a little bit. I think that this was verging on greatness, and to me hits being a solid read that could be so much more. I think that this would make a fantastic film. And the final book that I read in August was Kazuo Ishiguro's, I hope I've got your name right there, A Pale View of Hills. This was his debut novel. Came out in 1982, over 40 years ago now, Jesus. And it tells the story of a Japanese woman named Etsuko, who's now living alone in England and dwelling on the recent loss of her daughter. And while she's there, she's also recalling events from her past, her encounters with a woman named Sachiko and her daughter Mariko. And this book is fascinating. I've been thinking about it since I finished it. This is a slow burn mystery of a book that in its last 10 or 15 pages suddenly opens itself up to you. And when it does, you have to think about it in a completely different way. It just alters everything you saw about it. It's a brilliant read. It really is. And the characters are so easy to just imagine, to visualize. Ishiguro writes in a really cinematic way. His prose unfolds and it's quite simple, quite accessible. This is not to his detriment. His writing is very easy to engage with. And I think that speaks volumes to the skill of this writer. And some of the scenes in this are just so unsettling. They really are. I think it's an incredibly strong debut novel. I'm definitely going to reread this in the future. So now that I've told you all I read in August, I'm going to force my girlfriend to be a part of this video, and she'll tell me what I'm reading in September.
So I've picked 5 books for you with a wide range.
Well, I have an eclectic taste.
Yes, that's it. And the thing is that like you've started your love for reading very recently. You don't have as many books to pick from.
No.
Whereas like you have probably like 30 books that you can pick for me.
Yeah.
This one is the first one, which I don't think I've ever heard you talk about.
No, so this is The River by Ruma Godden, who wrote a couple of books that have been turned into films. The first book of hers that I first heard about was Black Narcissus, which is a Powell and Pressburger film, which is absolutely extraordinary, that film. And The River was adapted by Jean Renoir into a 1951 French film. This is all familiar knowledge to you.
Yeah.
I know you
all
know
of it.
this.
I was going to pick Black Narcissus for you because you started that book and never finished it. But then I was like, you've tried to start it a couple of times. So I thought, you know what?
Yeah.
I'll pick a different book. Same author, but different story. And it's short, so hopefully.
It is very short, and I think the text is... It's not small, actually. It's basically a novella. I know very, very little about this, except it's a French film that takes place in Bengal.
Have you watched it?
No.
Oh, okay.
I've not watched it. Don't know too much about the plot. I like Black Narcissus. That made me buy the book. The book, what I read of it, I really liked. This just seems to me to be quite an important book to read. I don't know what tells me that, but I have an inkling.
The little voice in your head tells you.
Yeah, the little voice in my head told me to read this.
The next one I picked is an author that you've never heard of before.
I never mentioned him.
You've never read...
I never mentioned him.
Cormac who? Like, I don't think... This is a brand new author to you.
Completely unfamiliar.
And so I thought I'd be nice and give you one of his books.
Well, it's always nice to start a new author. So Cormac McCarthy, this finds him talking about... So it's the story of a woman who bears her brother's child. Ew! I didn't even notice that bit before.
A woman that... like, well, is it kind of like Phoebe and like Friends?
I didn't know. Right, a woman bears her brother's child, a boy. Oh, great. He leaves the baby in the woods and tells her he died of natural causes. Okay, I knew about that bit. I'm reading that
put
right
you
now.
off now.
A woman bears her
when did
brother's
it take?
child.
When did it take part? Like, when did it happen?
Oh, what? When
the
did it
turn
take
of the
place?
century. Well, I don't feel like it's artificial insemination because in Friends, Phoebe has her brother's babies,
But it's artificial.
but she's the surrogate.
You never thought you'd hear Cormac McCarthy and Friends in the same discussion. You're wrong. This is the content you will get on this channel. I'll look forward to reading this.
The Friends ripoff.
Yeah, to learning more about Cormac McCarthy, who I've never heard of.
And then I picked Sally Rooney. I bought you this book.
You did, very kindly.
Because you read Normal People and you really liked it. So I decided to get you Beautiful World, Where Are You? Because I'm hoping that you also like it.
I'm pretty sure I'll like this. I'm fairly confident. I have no idea what it's about, really. So it's about Alice, who's a novelist. Oh, there we go, that was it. It's about a novelist. I love films and books that are about writers, filmmakers, directors, anything that goes...
Creative.
Anyone that's about a creative character, I love that. And she meets Felix, who works in a warehouse, and asks him if he'd like to travel to Rome with her. In Dublin, her best friend Eileen is getting over a breakup and slips back into flirting with Simon, a man she's known since childhood. Okay, so it's talking about relationships, sex, friendship. Like, Normal People is an exploration of relationships and
I'm pretty sure
miscommunication.
Conversation with Friends is also relationships and miscommunication.
I'm starting to notice a pattern here.
Yeah.
I think that she likes talking about this sort of stuff. But Normal People is a wonderful book.
And what did you give Normal People?
5.
So I'm hoping I've bought you another 5-star.
Should be another 5, unless.
And then I can read it.
Well, you should read Normal People anyway.
I
think
should.
it's
Yeah,
a
I
great
should
book.
read Normal People. Yeah.
If you don't like miscommunication, or if it annoys you, don't read Normal People. That's not a spoiler. That's just it's entirely miscommunication. But it's a very good book.
And then I've picked this one for you.
This is the author I spoke about last, Kazuo Ishiguro. I don't know too much about this, really. I know it takes place in Japan, as his debut did, and I think it's talking about the rebuilding and about a painter. So again, like the first book, this is touching on reflection and talking about the past and how the past is echoed in the future. I love his concept. I love his characters. I think they're really interesting.
And then this is another book that I picked for you in the hopes that if you like it, I can read it as well.
I kept putting this one off.
I know, and I keep telling you to read it.
I should read it before the coffee gets cold.
I don't think it's not very long either. So
No, it's not. It's people who go to a cafe, and when they go there, they can order a cup of coffee. And when they order the coffee, they get the chance to travel back in time, but they can only be there as long as the coffee is still hot. So ergo the title, Before the Coffee Gets Cold.
They should get those those teacups where like it's the plastic and then it's got the inside and it keeps it hot
That's
for
genius.
longer.
You want to get a flask to deal with this. You can travel in time longer. I think most of these tackle stuff that happens in the past. It's talking about memory, reflection. This is a great premise. I love strong concepts, and I'm very hopeful that this will be a good book. Again, very short. I'm looking forward to reading this when I eventually get around to it.
Which one do you think will be your highest rated?
Cormac McCarthy's After Dark, and then I think it'll either be that or Sally Rooney. Beautiful World, Where Are You? Well, that's all my TBR for September. Now, you can find a lovely girlfriend at her channel, name being
Pandora's books.
Beautifully done. And yeah, I'll see you next video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.